Welcome to the International Marathon for UPSC CSE Mains 2026. Before we discuss India, China, the Quad, the United Nations, or the Indo-Pacific, we must first understand what international relations actually means from the UPSC perspective. This is important because many aspirants begin by memorizing current affairs. Every summit, every bilateral visit, every joint statement, every international organization. After a few months, they realize they have forgotten most of it. Why? The reason is simple. They memorized events. They never understood the framework. UPSC does not reward memory alone, it rewards understanding. So, international relations is not about remembering every international event. It is about understanding how India responds to an ever changing international environment. That single idea should remain in your mind throughout this marathon. So, now let us begin with the syllabus. The GS-2 syllabus divides international relations into four broad areas. What are the four broad areas? The first is India and its neighborhood. The first is India and its neighborhood. The second is bilateral, regional, and global groupings and agreements involving India are affecting India's interests. Bilateral, regional, and global groupings involving India are affecting India's interests. Then third one is the effect of the policies and politics of developed and developing countries on the India's interests along with the India diaspora. So this is policies and politics of developed and developing countries plus the Indian diaspora. And the fourth is important international institutions, agencies, and fora, their structure, mandate, and relevance for India. At first glance, these appear to be four independent topics, but they are not actually. There are different dimensions of one larger question. What is that question? How does India protect and promote its national interest in the international system? How does India protect and promote its national interest in the international system? That is the central theme of international relations. Let us now understand the first and most important concept, that is national interest. What is national interest? Every country, irrespective of its size, political system, or level of development, conducts foreign policy to protect its national interests. What is this national interest? For India, national interest broadly includes what? Protecting sovereignty, ensuring territorial integrity, maintaining national security, promoting economic growth, securing energy and technology, protecting Indian citizens abroad, and creating an external environment that supports domestic development. As far as India's concern is national interest, what India protects actually: sovereignty, territorial integrity, national security, economic growth, energy and technology security, protection of Indians abroad, an external environment that supports domestic development is called as national interests as far as India's is concerned. So one more thing, what is Whenever you read international development, do not ask what happened. Instead of that, you can ask, how does this affect India's national interest? How does this affect India's national interest? That simple shift transforms current affairs into analytical understanding. How does this affect India's national interest? Now, another question naturally arises. What is that question? How does India pursue its national interest? How does India pursue its national interest? Does India permanently align with one global power? Does it isolate itself from the world? The answer is neither. India follows the principle of strategic autonomy. What is strategic autonomy? How India pursues it? Strategic autonomy means that India retains the freedom to take decisions based on its own national interest rather than becoming dependent on any single country or any military bloc. This is called as strategic autonomy. That is independent decision making, no permanent alliances, no permanent military blocs. This is called as strategic autonomy. In this, you have to notice something very important. What is that? Strategic autonomy does not mean neutrality. Strategic autonomy does not mean neutrality, nor does it mean remaining equidistant from all countries. Then what it means, what its strategic autonomy exactly means, working with the different partners on different issues. Working with the different partners on different issues while preserving independent decision making. This is called as strategic autonomy. This principle explains why India can strengthen defense cooperation with France, technology partnership with the United States, energy cooperation with Russia, economic engagement with the European Union, maritime cooperation with Australia and Japan, and developmental partnership with Africa, all at the same time. That is not inconsistency, it is strategic autonomy in practice. Throughout this marathon, you will notice that this principle connects almost every topic we study. So, now let us understand another important transformation here. What is that transformation? International relations today is very different from what it was 2 or 3 decades ago. Earlier, foreign policy focused primarily on what wars, military alliances, and diplomatic negotiations. But today, international politics has expanded far beyond traditional security. Expanded far beyond traditional security. Now, depends on technology, artificial intelligence, semiconductors, critical minerals, climate change, energy transition, supply chains, digital infrastructure, maritime connectivity, cyber security, health security, space cooperation, etc. Currently depends on technology, artificial intelligence, semiconductors, critical minerals, climate change, energy transition, supply chains, digital infrastructure, maritime connectivity, cyber security, health security, and space cooperation. These have become central themes of international relations now. So, therefore, modern diplomacy is no longer conducted only through embassies and military agreements. Not that is no longer. It is also conducted through trade, technology, investment, innovation, connectivity, and global governance. This is why GS2 international relations has become increasingly interdisciplinary. Sometimes it connects with governance, it connects with economy, environment, science and technology, and it connects with internal security. So that you should never study it in isolation. Comes to the another important point. What is that important point? Many aspirants approach international relations country by country, like India, China, then India, USA, then India, Russia, then India, Japan, etc., and so on. But this method creates isolated knowledge. But UPSC expects something different. It expects you to identify the underlying strategic themes rather than isolated preparation. For example, instead of treating every partnership separately, you have to ask, what objective does this partnership serve? Does it strengthen technology cooperation? Does it strengthen energy security? Does it strengthen maritime security? Does it strengthen connectivity? Does it strengthen supply chain resilience? And does it strengthen regional stability? You have to ask these many questions, these many dimensions. Once you begin thinking in terms of objectives rather than countries, international relations becomes much easier to understand. So that is why you don't prepare as isolated knowledge, isolated facts. You have to prepare and identify the underlying strategic themes. Once you begin thinking in terms of objectives rather than countries, international relations become much easier to understand. So now let us briefly examine how UPSC frames questions. UPSC rarely asks explain the quad, etc. Instead of that, it asks like this: discuss the significance of the Indo-Pacific for India's strategic interests. Discuss the significance of the Indo-Pacific for India's strategic interests. It rarely asks describe BRICS. Instead of that, it asks like this: evaluate the role of emerging multilateral institutions in promoting a multipolar world order. Similarly, it does not ask write about India in Bangladesh relations. Instead of that, it asks like this: discuss the importance of neighborhood diplomacy for India's security and development. Discuss the importance of neighborhood diplomacy for India's security and development. Please notice the pattern here. UPSC tests analysis, UPSC tests connections, UPSC tests policy understanding, not isolated facts. Therefore, throughout this marathon, our focus will remain on concept, will remain on frameworks, will remain on answer writing. Current affairs will be used only to illustrate these concepts. Before we move to the next chapter, what we have to do is let us build one simple mental framework. What is that mental framework? Every topic in international relations can be understood through 6 questions. What are the 6 questions? First and foremost, why is this why is this issue important for India's national interest? Why is this issue important for India's national interest? And comes to the second question. What opportunities does it create? And third one, what challenges does it create? And fourth one, how has India responded? And fifth one, which foreign policy principles guide India's response? And finally, what should be the way forward? Every topic in international relations can be understood through these six questions. Why is this issue important for India's national interest? What opportunities does it create? What challenges does it create? How has India responded? Which foreign policy principles guide India's response? And finally, what should be the way forward? If you answer these six questions, you can write a strong UPSC answer almost any international relations topic as far as UPSC CSE mains is concerned. So throughout this marathon, remember one chain, that is national interest, then strategic autonomy, then partnerships, then global governance, and finally India's rise as a responsible global power. This simple framework will help you connect every chapter that follows. That is why you have to remember this simple framework. So now, with this foundation in place, let us begin with the first substantive theme of India's foreign policy, that is India and its neighborhood. Because every country's foreign policy begins with its geography before it expands to the wider world. So, what is that? What is the wider world? What is the wider world? We are going to discuss the foundations of India's foreign policy. What is the India's foreign policy? National interest, strategic autonomy, and the India's global vision. That is the foundations of India's foreign policy. That we understand what international relations means for UPSC, let us move to the most fundamental question. What is that question? What guides India's foreign policy? What guides India's foreign policy? Why does India cooperate with one country, compete with other, join some international organizations, and remain cautious in others? Is there one guiding principle behind all these decisions? First one, what guides India's foreign policy? Then why does India cooperate with one country, compete with another, and join some international organization and remain cautious in others? Is there one guiding principle behind all these decisions? The answer is yes. Every country's foreign policy ultimately revolves around one central idea, that is national interest. Let us understand this carefully. National interest simply means those objectives that are essential for the country's security, prosperity, sovereignty, development, and long-term well-being. And long-term well-being. It is the primary consideration behind every foreign policy decision, because governments may change, political parties may change, international circumstances may change, but the pursuit of national interest remains constant. Therefore, whenever India signs a trade agreement, participates in a summit, responds to an international crisis, or joins a multilateral initiative, the underlying question is always the same. How does this advance India's national interest? This is the first principle you should apply to every international relations question in UPSC. Now comes to the second question, what constitutes India's national interest? What constitutes India's national interest? It can broadly be understood six dimensions. It can broadly be understood six dimensions. What is the six dimensions? And first one is national security. National security, protecting sovereignty, territorial integrity, and internal stability. Then comes to the second one, economic development, expanding trade, attracting investment, improving technology access, and creating employment opportunities. And third one is energy security, ensuring reliable access to oil, gas, renewable energy, and critical minerals necessary for economic growth. And comes to the fourth part, technological advancement, strengthening capabilities in artificial intelligence, semiconductors, space, cyber security, digital infrastructure and innovation. Then comes to the fifth, protection of overseas Indians, safeguarding the interests, welfare, and rights of Indian citizens and the Indian diaspora abroad. And comes to the finally, a stable external environment. What is a stable external environment? Because sustained domestic development requires peace, predictability, and international cooperation. These six dimensions is needed. One thing you notice something important, that is foreign policy is not separate from development. Foreign policy ultimately supports development. Now another important question arises, how does India pursue these national interests? Does India permanently align itself with one major power, or does India remain completely detached from international affairs? The answer is neither. India follows the principle of strategic autonomy. Strategic autonomy means India retains the freedom to take independent foreign policy decisions based on its own national interest without becoming dependent on any particular military alliance or geopolitical bloc. This is one of the defining features of India's foreign policy. Strategic autonomy means India retains the freedom to take independent foreign policy decisions based on its own national interest without becoming dependent on any particular military alliance or geopolitical bloc. This is one of the defining features of India's foreign policy. Strategic autonomy is often misunderstood, that is, it does not mean neutrality. It does not mean remaining silent during international crisis. It does not mean maintaining equal distance from every country. Instead of that, it means issue based partnerships. Like India cooperates with different countries in different sectors depending on national priorities. Let's say, for example, India works with United States on technology, critical and emerging technologies, and defense cooperation. It works with Russia on energy, defense, and strategic cooperation. It works with France on the Indo-Pacific, space, and civil nuclear cooperation. Then it works with Japan on infrastructure, high-speed rail, and connectivity. Then it works with the European Union on trade, green technologies, and digital cooperation. Then it works with the Gulf countries on energy, investment, food security, and logistics. Notice the pattern one thing clearly. India is not choosing one partnership at cost of another. It is building multiple partnerships. It is building multiple partnerships while preserving independent decision making. That is strategic autonomy in practice. That is why I explained second time. Now let us understand another important transformation, that is India's foreign policy today is no longer confined to traditional diplomacy. Earlier countries primarily competed through military power, territory and political alliances. But today competition increasingly revolves around technology, critical minerals, supply chains, digital infrastructure, artificial intelligence, maritime connectivity, and climate transition. This transition is often described as the rise of geoeconomics. This transformation is often described as the rise of geoeconomics. The rise of geoeconomics is most important in this era because economic capability has become an important source of strategic influence. Countries that lead in technology, manufacturing, innovation, and resilient supply chains acquire greater geopolitical influence. So, that is why technology, manufacturing, innovation, and resilient supply chains are important for the greater geopolitical influence. Therefore, foreign policy and economic policy are becoming increasingly interconnected. So, throughout this marathon, throughout this marathon, you will repeatedly observe this relationship. Another important objective of India's foreign policy is a contribute is a contribute to a stable multipolar and rules based international order. Therefore, foreign policy and economic policy are become increasingly interconnected. Foreign policy and economic policy are becoming increasingly interconnected. So that is why throughout this marathon, you will repeatedly observe this relationship, that is foreign policy and economic policy. Comes to the another important objective of India's foreign policy is what? To contribute to a stable multipolar and rules based international order. What is that stable multipolar and rules based international order? Let us understand these three ideas. What are those three ideas? That is, a stable international order is essential because conflicts, wars, and instability disrupt trade, disrupt energy supplies, disrupt investment, and disrupt economic growth. A multipolar world is one in which influence is disturbed among several major powers rather than concentrated in one. A multipolar world is one in which the influence is distributed among several major powers rather than concentrated in one. So India believes that a multipolar world provides greater strategic space for countries to pursue independent foreign policies. Finally, a rules-based international order. What is that rules-based international order? Rules-based international order means that international relations should be governed by international law, respect for sovereignty, peaceful settlement of disputes, and multilateral cooperation rather than unilateral use of force. This explains why India consistently supports the United Nations, UNCLOS, reformed multilateralism, and peaceful dialogue. That is why India consistently supports. Now let us connect all these ideas. Sometimes students ask, what is the India's grand strategy? What is India's grand strategy? It can actually be summarized in one sentence. What is that? India seeks to create an external environment that enables domestic transformation. India seeks to create an external environment that enables domestic transformation. Notice how every major foreign policy initiative supports this objective. That is, neighborhood first promotes regional stability. Act strengthens connectivity with Southeast Asia. The Indo-Pacific protects maritime interests. Then strategic partnerships improve technology access. Trade agreements expand economic opportunities. Global governance reforms create a more representative international system. All these initiatives ultimately contribute to one large objective, that is India's long-term development. Now let us briefly understand how UPSC expects you to analyze foreign policy. So never write answers country by country. Instead of that, use a common analytical framework. What is the common analytical framework? For that, ask four questions. What are the four questions? Why is this issue important for India's national interest? Why is this issue important for India's national interest? What opportunities does it create? What challenges does it present? And how should India respond? This framework works equally well for India China, India Bangladesh, Quad, BRICS, the WTO, and Indo Pacific, or any other topic in this syllabus. Before we proceed, let us revise the key ideas. What are the key ideas? Every country's foreign policy begins with national interest. India pursues these interests through strategic autonomy. Then strategic autonomy allows India to build multiple partnerships while preserving independent decision making. Then modern diplomacy increasingly combines economics, technology, security, and connectivity. But and one more thing, India seeks a stable multipolar rules-based international order that support that supports its long-term development. Long-term development. If you remember these principles, every chapter that follows will become much easier to understand. For comes to the main ammunition, I'm going to give you some verified anchors of things. That is Panchashil 1954 and non-alignment movement NAM 1961. That is historical roots of independent decision making. Strategic autonomy or multi-alignment is their contemporary evolution. Then comes to the Gujarat Doctrine 96 and 97. This is non-reciprocal accommodation of smaller neighbors. Intellectual ancestors of neighborhood first. And External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, the India way. What is the India way? India must engage America, manage China, cultivate Europe, reassure Russia, and bring Japan into play. A one-line summary of multi-alignment. India must engage America, manage China, cultivate Europe, reassure Russia, and bring Japan into play. This is a one-line summary of multi-alignment. India is now the world's fourth largest economy and aims at Vikasit Bharat 2047. Foreign policy is an enabler of domestic transformation. Comes to the maritime doctrine evolution. What is the maritime doctrine evolution? Sagar 2015, Mahasagar 2025, mutual and holistic advancement for security and growth across regions. This is Mahasagar announced during PM's Mauritius visit March 2025. Comes to the foreign exchange reserves. 701.4 US dollar billions January 2026 as economic survey. Roughly 11 months of import cover. External resilience underpins strategic confidence. These are may going to help you in UPSC Mains 2026 examination. Comes to the PYQ corner as far as this particular foreign policy is concerned. In 2025 10 marker question that is given from the syllabus, these topics: with the waning of globalization, post-Cold War world is becoming a site of sovereign nationalism. Elucidate. And comes to the 2013 question that is 10 marker. What is meant by Gujarat Doctrine? Does it have any relevance today? Discuss. And comes to the 2019 question that is 15 marker. The time has come for India and Japan to build a strong contemporary relationship, one involving global and strategic partnership that will have a great significance for Asia and the world as a whole. Comment. These are the questions. With this conceptual foundation in place, we can now begin the first substantive pillar of India's foreign policy, that is India and its neighborhood. Because in international relations, geography is permanent. Geography is permanent. And every country's foreign policy begins with its immediate neighborhood. So we are going to discuss India's neighborhood first policy, that is geography, regional stability, and India's strategic priorities. Now, what we have understood, the foundations of India's foreign policy, let us move to its first and most important pillar, that is India's neighborhood. Before discussing Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, or China, we must first answer one basic question. What is that basic question? That is, why does every country give such importance to its immediate neighborhood? Why? The answer is simple. Unlike allies, geography cannot be changed. Governments may change, political leadership may change, international circumstances may change, but neighboring countries remain permanent. So that is why every country's foreign policy begins with its geography. India is no exception for that. India shares land and maritime boundaries with several countries. Collectively, these neighbors influence India's security, trade, connectivity, migration, energy, water resources, and regional stability. So, therefore, developments in the neighborhood rarely remain external issues. They often become domestic corners. Let's say, for example, political instability in a neighboring country may affect border security, may affect migration, may affect economic activity or India's northeastern states. So similarly, improved connectivity with neighboring countries can expand trade, can expand investment, tourism, energy cooperation, and regional development. So this close interdependence explains why the neighborhood occupies a central place in India's foreign policy. So recognizing this reality, India has consistently emphasized the principle of neighborhood first. Emphasize the principle of neighborhood first. Neighborhood first does not mean giving preference to one country over another. Then what? Rather, it reflects the understanding that regional peace, understanding that mutual trust, and shared prosperity are essential for India's own development. So the objective is simple. A peaceful neighborhood creates opportunity for economic growth, connectivity, regional trade, and collective security. So unstable neighborhood creates uncertainty, security challenges, and developmental constraints. So therefore, India's long-term interest lies in promoting a stable, secure, prosperous, and interconnected South Asia. Now, what are the major pillars of the neighborhood first policy? The first pillar is political engagement, regular dialogue, high level visits, institutional cooperation, and diplomatic communication help build trust between neighboring countries. So diplomacy becomes particularly important during periods of political transition or regional uncertainty. India's objective is to maintain constructive engagement while respecting the sovereignty and democratic choices of neighborhood countries, neighboring countries. So comes to the second pillar, that is connectivity. Connectivity. Earlier foreign policy focused primarily on political agreements, but today connectivity has become equally important, like roads, railways, ports, air connectivity, inland waterways, power transmission, digital infrastructure. These are no longer merely developmental projects, they are strategic assets. And improved connectivity reduces transportation costs, facilitate trade, strengthen regional value chains, and integrates economies. For India, connectivity is particularly important for improving access to the northeastern states, which increasingly serve as India's gateway to Southeast Asia. So comes to the third pillar is economic integration. What is the economic integration? Trade, investment, energy cooperation, cross-border electricity transmission, and regional value chains strengthen economic independence. Countries that benefit from mutual economic cooperation are generally better positioned to manage political differences peacefully. Therefore, economic integration contributes not only prosperity but also to regional stability. Comes to the fourth pillar is security cooperation. What is security cooperation? Many security challenges in South Asia are transnational. What is that? Transnational, like terrorism, illegal trafficking, drug smuggling, cyber crime, human trafficking, maritime security, and natural disasters. So no country can address these challenges alone. They require intelligence sharing, capacity building, border management, joint exercises, and institutional cooperation. So India therefore increasingly works with neighboring countries to strengthen regional security while respecting national sovereignty. And then comes to the fifth pillar, that is people to people relations. So governments negotiate agreements, but long term partnerships are strengthened by people. So shared history, culture, education, tourism, religious links, business, academic exchanges, medical cooperation. These create social trust that supports diplomatic relations over time. So for India, civilizational ties remain an important component of neighborhood diplomacy. So now another important transformation has taken place here. Neighborhood diplomacy is no longer confined to bilateral relations. Increasingly, India promotes sub-regional cooperation. What is sub-regional cooperation? Instead of waiting for every regional institution function perfectly, countries are increasingly cooperating through smaller practical arrangements. One example is BBIN, that is Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal. These countries cooperate in areas such as transport, connectivity, trade, and energy. Similarly, India has strengthened maritime cooperation in the Indian Ocean through platforms such as the Colombo Security Conclave. What is Colombo Security Conclave? Colombo Security Conclave, which promotes collaboration in maritime security, counter-terrorism, cyber security, and disaster response. So notice something important. This reflects a larger trend that we will discuss later. That is, countries increasingly prefer functional cooperation that produces practical outcomes. So this reflects a larger trend that we will discuss later. What is that? Countries increasingly prefer functional cooperation that produce practical outcomes. At the same time, India's neighborhood has become more strategically significant. India's neighborhood has become more strategically significant. Why? India's neighborhood has become more strategically significant. Why? Because external powers have increased their engagement across South Asia. So neighboring countries today have multiple economic and strategic partners. Therefore, India's approach is not based on compelling countries to choose between competing powers. Not India's approach is not based on compelling countries to choose between competing powers. Instead of that, India seeks to remain a reliable, development oriented, and trusted partner through capacity building, connectivity, development assistance, humanitarian support, and mutually beneficial partnerships. So, this approach reflects confidence rather than competition. So, now how does UPSC analyze neighborhood relations? So, UPSC rarely asks, describe India's relationship with Nepal. Instead of that, it asks broader analytical questions. Let's say, for example, why is regional connectivity important for India's neighborhood policy? Or discuss the importance of stable neighborhood relations for India's national security and development, or evaluate the opportunities and challenges associated with India's neighborhood first policy. Notice the pattern. UPSC expects you to analyze principles, analyze objectives, analyze challenges, and analyze policy responses, not simply narrate bilateral events. So comes to the answer writing framework, how you can write an answer. Whenever a question appears on India's neighborhood, remember this five-step structure. First and foremost, explain why the neighborhood is strategically important. Then comes to the second one, identify India's objectives like security, connectivity, economic integration, and regional stability. Then comes to the third one, discuss the major challenges like political instability, cross-border terrorism, migration, water disputes, external strategic competition, and implementation gaps, etc. And comes to the fourth one, that is explain India's responses. Explain India's response like neighborhood first, development partnerships, connectivity, capacity building, security cooperation, and sub-regional initiatives like BBIN. Then finally conclude by emphasizing that is mutual trust, shared prosperity, respect for sovereignty, and regional cooperation. In this way, you have to conclude. So comes to this quick recap of this chapter. That is, before moving to individual countries, remember five key ideas. What are the five key ideas you have to remember? Neighborhood first begins with geography. Its objective is regional stability. Its instruments are connectivity, economic integration, security cooperation, and people to people ties. These are five key ideas. That is regional stability, taken as political stability, then connectivity, then economic integration or economic cooperation, then security cooperation, and people to people ties. These are five key ideas, or these are five pillars of neighborhood policy. It guiding principle. Its guiding principle is partnership based on mutual respect and shared development. Guiding principle is what? Partnership on mutual respect and shared development. So if you understand this framework, every bilateral relationship that follows, like Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Maldives, Pakistan, and China, etc., will become much easier to analyze. So comes to the mains ammunition and verified anchors. PBIN Motor Vehicles Agreement 2015, sub-regional connectivity when SARC stalled. SARC has not held a summit since Kathmandu 2014. Then comes to the BIMSTEC Charter adopted 2022. Then sixth summit Bangkok, April 2025. India's preferred Bay of Bengal platform. Then Vision 2030 adopted in April 2025. Then comes to the Colombo Security Conclave. In that India, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Mauritius, and Bangladesh maritime security, counter-terrorism, and cyber HADR. Then comes to Nepal Agreement 2023 to import 10,000 megawatts of Nepali hydropower over 10 years. First trilateral Nepal, India, Bangladesh power flow began 2024. Then Maldives comes to the Maldives relationship reset after 2024 strains. Currency swap support, continued capacity building illustrates strategic patience. Then first responder credentials, that is Operation Rahat, MN 2015, Operation Dost, Turkey, Syria, earthquake 2023, Operation Brahma, Myanmar, earthquake 2025, Comes to Sri Lanka, India's USD 4 billion assistance during the 2022 economic crisis, bigger than IMF's initial package, strongest recent proof of neighborhood first. These are then comes to the PYQ corner. As far as neighborhood, India's neighborhood is concerned, chapters is concerned, discuss the geopolitical and geostrategic importance of Maldives for India with a focus on global trade and energy flows. Further, also discuss how this relationship affects India's maritime security and regional stability amidst international competition. This is asked in 2024 15 marker question. Then comes to another question asked in 2015 10 marker question, that is Project Mausam is considered a unique foreign policy initiatives of the Indian government to improve relationship with its neighbors. Does this project have a strategic dimension? Discuss. Then comes to another question, that is India is an age-old friend of Sri Lanka. Discuss India's role in the recent crisis in Sri Lanka in the light of preceding statement. This question asked in 2022 10 marker question. So now with this conceptual foundation in place, let us begin with one of the India's most successful and strategical significant neighborhood partnership, that is India and Bangladesh, because it demonstrates how connectivity, how security cooperation and economic integration can transform bilateral relations. So before we study individual bilateral relations, let us quickly build a mental framework for India's neighborhood. What is that mental framework? UPSC rarely asks you to narrate the entire history of relations with every neighboring country. You have to remember this. UPSC rarely asks you to narrate the entire history of relations with every neighboring country. Instead of that, it expects you to identify the strategic importance of each country. So that is why let us revise them quickly. Comes to Bangladesh. This is Bangladesh gateway to India's northeast, connectivity, Bay of Bengal, energy cooperation, shared rivers like Ganga, etc. Then regional integration. These are belongs to Bangladesh. Then comes to Nepal, open borders, civilizational ties, hydropower, we discussed earlier, and Himalayan security and people to people relations. Then comes to the Bhutan. This is India's closest development partner, hydropower cooperation, environmental conservation, and strategic stability in the Himalayas. Then comes to Sri Lanka. This is Indian Ocean maritime security, blue economy, connectivity, Tamil reconciliation, economic cooperation and regional stability. Then Maldives, maritime geography, Indian Ocean security, tourism, capacity building, and Sagar. Comes to Myanmar, gateway to Southeast Asia, Act East policy, Northeast connectivity, border security, and regional stability. Comes to the Pakistan cross-border terrorism, security challenges, the Indus Waters framework, and the importance of peaceful neighborhood relations. Then comes to the China, boundary management, strategic competition, economic interdependence, technology, and the Indo-Pacific. In this, you have to notice something important. That is, every neighbor country is differently to India's national interest. Some strengthen connectivity, some strengthen maritime security, some influence border management, some contribute to energy and economic integration. Therefore, never study neighboring countries in isolation. Always connect them with the larger objectives of neighborhood first, regional stability, connectivity, economic integration, and strategic autonomy. So now that we have understand the broader framework of the neighborhood first policy. So let us examine India's relationship with Bangladesh. Among all India's neighbors, Bangladesh represents one of the strongest example of how sustained political engagement, economic cooperation, connectivity, and mutual trust can transform bilateral relations. So for UPSC, Bangladesh is important not merely because it is neighboring country, but because it illustrates how India's neighborhood policy operates in practice. So let us first understand why Bangladesh is strategically important. The first reason is geography. So Bangladesh almost surrounds India's northeastern states, making it one of the India's most significant geographical partners. So connectivity increased limited connectivity increased transportation costs and constrained economic integration between mainland India and northeast. Today, improved connectivity through Bangladesh has significantly altered this situation. Roads, railways, inland waterways, coastal shipping, and port access have strengthened links between the northeast and the rest of India. Therefore, Bangladesh is not merely a neighbor, it is an important gateway for regional connectivity. And comes to the second dimension is economic cooperation. Trade between India and Bangladesh has expanded steadily over the last decade. Both countries are strengthening cooperation in energy transport, digital connectivity, border infrastructure and investment. So cross-border electricity trade has become another important area of cooperation. So this is demonstrating how regional integration increasingly extends beyond traditional trade. So notice something important here again. Modern bilateral relations are no longer driven only by diplomatic agreements. They are increasingly driven by economic interdependence, economic cooperation. Countries that trade, invest, and build infrastructure together also develop stronger incentives to maintain stable political relations. So third dimension is connectivity. Connectivity has become one of the defining features of India-Bangladesh relations. Earlier foreign policy focused primarily on political dialogue. Today, connectivity itself has become a strong instrument. Road corridors, rail corridors, inland waterways, port connectivity, energy grids, digital links, all these strengthen regional integration. For India, improved connectivity through Bangladesh contributes directly to the development of the Northeast, and then reduce transportation costs, improves logistics, and expands economic opportunities. This also supports India's Act East policy. Act East policy by improving access to Southeast Asia. So notice how one bilateral relationship simultaneously strengthen neighborhood first and Act East. So that is exactly how UPSC expects you to connect different themes. Comes to the fourth dimension is security cooperation. Security cooperation between India and Bangladesh has expanded considerably. Both countries have worked together against terrorism, extremism, cross-border crime, illegal trafficking, and organized criminal networks. This cooperation contributes to peace and stability in the India's northeast and strengthens mutual confidence. So notice something here. Regional security today depends not only on military strength, but also on intelligence sharing, border management, institutional cooperation, and trust. The fifth dimension is river water cooperation. This is most important. India and Bangladesh share numerous transboundary rivers. Consequently, water management becomes an environmental issue, a developmental issue, and a diplomatic issue. So, effective river cooperation contributes to agriculture, livelihoods, flood management, ecological sustainability, and regional trust also. Whenever UPSC asks a question on India Bangladesh, always remember to include water diplomacy along with connectivity and security cooperation and economic integration. That immediately makes your answer multidimensional. So now let us understand important contemporary development is foreign policy must adapt to political changes within neighboring countries. So governments may change, political coalitions may evolve, domestic priorities may shift. But how should India respond? India's long term approach towards Bangladesh has been guided by strategic patience. What is the strategic patience? Strategic patience means maintaining engagement with the institutions, people, and long term interests of the neighboring country rather than reacting only to changes in political leadership. This reflects this reflects an important principle of diplomacy. Strategic patience. Neighborhood relations should be guided by continuity, mutual respect, and a long-term national interests, not by short-term political developments. And another important dimension is sub-regional cooperation. South Asia has often faced difficulties. Southeast Asia, South Asia has often faced difficulties in achieving deeper regional integration through larger regional organizations. Consequently, India increasingly promotes practical sub-regional initiatives. I already discussed one important example, BBIN, that is Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal. BBIN focuses on transport, trade, energy connectivity, and economic integration. So, notice the larger lesson here. Modern regional diplomacy increasingly progresses through smaller functional partnerships capable of delivering practical outcomes. This trend reflects the broader transformation in international relations that we will later discuss as functional minilateralism. So now let us connect Bangladesh with the wider Indo-Pacific because Bangladesh occupies an important position along the Bay of Bengal. Therefore, maritime cooperation is become increasingly significant. So cooperation in coastal security, blue economy, disaster management, port development, and maritime connectivity strengthens not only bilateral relations but also regional stability across the Bay of Bengal. So that is why how India Bangladesh relations now connect to multiple strategic frameworks. That is neighborhood first, Act East, Bay of Bengal cooperation, connectivity, regional integration, and the Indo Pacific. The integrated understanding is exactly what UPSC expects from you. At the same time, India Bangladesh relations continue to face certain challenges also. Border management, illegal migration, water sharing, implementation delays, and changing domestic political circumstances occasionally create disturbances. But however, both countries have consistently demonstrated the importance of dialogue, institutional engagement, and peaceful resolution of differences. So that is why that remains the most appropriate approach for long-term bilateral stability. Comes to the current affairs anchors 2025 to 2026. Let me give you some specific anchors that will make your answer stand out in mains 2026. What are the anchors? The single most important date in India Bangladesh relations right now is December 2026. Why? Because the Ganga Water Sharing Treaty of 1996, signed for 30 years ago, expires in December 2026. This treaty governs the sharing of dry season Ganga waters at the Farakka barrage using a formula based on historical flows with a special consultation clause if availability falls below 50,000 cusecs. So renewal discussions have already begun. So with giant teams measuring flows on the Ganga and Padma. Remember, India and Bangladesh share 54 transboundary rivers. So when UPSC asks about India Bangladesh in 2026, water diplomacy is not background material. It is the live issue. Comes to two more anchors. That is, first one, the land boundary agreement of 2015. This is implemented through the 100 constitutional amendment with peacefully settle a boundary dispute through exchange of enclaves. Cite it as proof that India resolves disputes through land dialogue. Then comes to the second one, that is connectivity has delivered concrete results. What are the concrete results? The Maitri Setu over the Feni River, the Akaura Agartala rail link inaugurated in 2023, and the Maitri thermal power project. And one contemporary point is which you should handle with balance. Bangladesh went through a major political transition in August 2024. For that, India's response has been exactly what this chapter describes, that is, strategic patience. Engagement with institutions and people, not just with governments. Despite political change, India has remained among Bangladesh's largest trading partners. And in 2026, India emerged as Bangladesh's second largest trading partner. This is the maturity UPSC expects you to demonstrate in the exam. Comes to the how UPSC may ask this. UPSC is unlikely to ask describe India Bangladesh relations. They ask like this. Connectivity has emerged as the defining feature of India and Bangladesh. Discuss or evaluate the strategic importance of Bangladesh in India's neighborhood first policy, or discuss the opportunities challenges in India Bangladesh relations in the context of regional integration. Please notice these are analytical questions. Therefore, your answers must also remain analytical only. Comes to the answer writing framework. Whenever a question appears on India Bangladesh, you have to remember four headings. First one, strategic importance. Second one, areas of cooperation. And third one, challenges. Fourth one, way forward. Comes to the first one, strategic importance. You have to write about gateway to Northeast, then Bay of Bengal, then regional stability, then shared rivers. This is under strategic importance. Then comes to second one, areas cooperation. In this, under this heading, you have to write connectivity, trade, energy, security, river water cooperation, and maritime cooperation. Then comes to the third part, that is challenges. What are the challenges? Like water sharing, border management, illegal migration, political transition, implementation gaps, etc. Comes to the way forward part, you have to write strengthen connectivity, expand BBI and cooperation, improve water management, enhance maritime collaboration, deepen people to people ties, and continue institution dialogue based on mutual trust. Here you have to remember one sentence, that is India-Bangladesh relations demonstrate that successful neighborhood diplomacy depends on connectivity, economic integration, security cooperation, strategic patience, and the mutual trust. This single line can become an excellent conclusion for almost any UPSC answer on this relationship, like India-Bangladesh relationship question. Comes to the main examination, that is Ganga Water Sharing Treaty, 12th December 1996, 30 years validity, expires December 2026. That is formula based dry season, sharing at Farakka, consultation class below 50,000 cusecs, renewal talks underway 2026. Comes to the 54 transboundary reverse shared, Tista agreement still pending, standard challenge point this is. Then comes to land boundary agreement 2015, 100th constitutional amendment, peaceful settlement of enclaves, model of rules based dispute resolution. Then comes to connectivity delivered, like Maitri Setu 2021, Akaura Agartala Rail Link 2023, Maitri 1320 megawatt power plant, coastal shipping and inland waterways protocols. Then August 2024 political transition, India's response that equal to strategic patience. India became Bangladesh's second largest trading partner in 2026. Then comes to cross-border electricity trade, includes the first India facilitated Nepal Bangladesh power flow 2024 site as energy integration example. I'm repeating again, cross-border electricity trade. Cross-border electricity trade includes the first India facilitated Nepal Bangladesh power flow 2024 site as energy integration example. Then comes to PYQ corner, that is the protests in Shahbag Square in Dhaka in Bangladesh reveal a fundamental split in society between the nationalists and Islamic forces. What is its significance for India? 2013. The question given in 2013 for 10 markers. The next question, analyze internal security threats and transborder crimes along Myanmar, Bangladesh and Pakistan borders including line of control. Also discuss the role played by various security forces in the regard. This question asked in 2020, GS-3 15 markers used for the security cooperation dimensions. After understanding one of India's strongest neighborhood partnership, let us move to its most difficult one, India and Pakistan. Because Mains 2026 cannot be attempted without understanding how the events of 2025 created a completely new framework for this relationship. That is India-Pakistan relations, Operation Sindoor, the new normal, and the future deterrence. Let us now discuss the relationship that changed the most between the last Mains and this one, that is India and Pakistan. For decades, this relationship was described through a familiar cycle. A terrorist attack, international condemnation, diplomatic pressure, and then a slow return to the status quo. In 2025, that cycle was decisively broken. Let us understand how, because UPSC will not ask you to narrate events. It will ask you to explain the doctrinal shift. What is the doctrinal shift here? On 22nd April 2025, terrorists attacked civilians at Pahalgam in Jammu and Kashmir, killing 26 people, most of them are tourists. The attack was carried out by the Resistance Front, a proxy of the Pakistan-based Lashkar-e-Taiba. India's response came on 7 May 2025 when the armed forces launched Operation Sindoor. Understand what made this operation different. First, it was a tri-services precision operation against 9 terrorist sites, not only in Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir, but deep inside Pakistan itself, including the Jaish-e-Mohammed headquarters at Bahawalpur, and the Lashkar-e-Taiba center in Muridke. These were the deepest Indian strikes into Pakistan since 1971. Comes to the second point, the operation was described by the government as focused, measured, and non-escalatory. The initial strikes targeted terrorist infrastructure, not Pakistani military installations. Escalations began only when Pakistan retaliated against Indian military and civilian targets, after which India struck Pakistani air defenses and air bases, and then accepted a cessation of hostilities on 10th May 2025. Third, the operation showcased indigenous capability, precision missiles, and a layered air defense system that intercepted hundreds of incoming drones and projectiles. So, technology, in other words, expanded the space of conventional response. Now comes to the part UPSC is most likely to test. After the operation, the Prime Minister articulated what has came to be called the new normal. The new normal, India's new response doctrine. It has three tenets. One, every terrorist attack on India will receive a decisive response at a time, place, and manner of India's choosing. Two, that is, India will not deterred by nuclear blackmail. The false equivalence between the victim of terrorism and its sponsor, run under a nuclear shadow, stands rejected. Then comes to the third one. India will make no distinction between terrorists and the states that sponsor them. And running through all three is one older principle now stated with a new firmness: terror and tax cannot go together. Terror and trade cannot go together. And water and blood cannot flow together. That last sentence brings us to the second gear shift of 2025. That is the Indus Waters Treaty. The treaty was signed in 1960s, brokered by the World Bank, allocating the eastern rivers to India and the western rivers to largely to Pakistan. It survived wars, it survived crisis, but in April 2025, after the Pahalgam attack, India placed the treaty in abeyance. For the first time in its history, India's stated position has three layers. First, the abeyance will continue until Pakistan credibly and irreversibly ends support for cross-border terrorism. And second, India argues that treaty itself needs renegotiation because fundamental circumstances have changed over 6 decades. That is climate change, demographic pressure, clean energy needs, and new dam technology. Under Article 12, the treaty can be modified by mutual consent. Under Article, the treaty can be modified only by mutual consent. And India says Pakistan has repeatedly refused even to discuss modification. So third one, when the permanent court of arbitration in proceedings India has never accepted, ruled in 2025 that the treaty does not permit unilateral abeyance and issued a further award on water storage in May 2026. India rejected both as null and void, maintaining the maintaining that the arbitral court itself was illegally constituted. For UPSC, do not take sides on the legal debate. Present it as it is, a live tension between a state's response to terrorism and the sanctity of treaty obligations under international law. The balance is exactly what you 50 marker will reward. Now step back. What does this chapter teach us analytically? It teaches the India's Pakistan policy now rests on four instruments used together. That is military deterrence, the new normal; hydro diplomacy, the treaty in abeyance; economic and diplomatic isolation, no trade, no tax, and no trade, no tax, and sustained pressure on terror financing. Where the FATF process remains India's multilateral lever, and hyphenation, hyphenation, what? India engages the world on its own terms and treats any third party mediation claims with a consistent position. What is consistent position? Issues with Pakistan are strictly bilateral under the framework of the Shimla Agreement of 1972. At the same time, a balanced answer acknowledges the risks, escalation under a nuclear overhang, the humanitarian dimensions of water disputes, and the long term question of how two nuclear neighbors stabilize deterrence without dialogue. A mature conclusion states that firmness against terrorism and openness to a terror free dialogue are not contradictions. So, they are the two halves of India's stated position. That is how UPSC may ask this. UPSC is unlikely to ask describe Operation Sindur. They asked like this: India's response to cross border terrorism has shifted from strategic restraint to assured retaliation. Critically examine this doctrinal evolution, or the abeyance of the Indus Water Treaty marks the securitization of water in India-Pakistan relations. Discuss its strategic and legal implications. Or deterrence, not dialogue, now defines India's Pakistan policy. Do you agree? Give reasons. Notice the pattern: doctrine, instruments, implications, not chronology here. Comes to the current affairs anchor 2025-2026. Three dates to remember, that is 22nd April 2025 Pahalgam, 7 May 2025 Operation Sindur, April 2025 onwards the Indus Water Treaty in abeyance. A position India reaffirmed throughout 2026, including at the United Nations, while rejecting the arbitration award of May 2026. Comes to the answer writing framework. Whenever a question appears on India Pakistan, remember four subheadings or four headings. First, doctrinal shift. Second, instruments of statecraft. Third, challenges. And fourth, obviously, way forward. Comes to the first part, that is doctrinal shift. That is strategic restraint. Strategic restraint means assured retaliation. Then comes to the new normal. New normal means what? Retaliations assured. No nuclear blackmail, no terrorist sponsored distinction. Then comes to second one, that is instruments of statecraft. What is the instrument of statecraft? Military calibrated non-escalatory precision strikes. Then comes to diplomatic bilateralism, Shimla under 1972 agreement. Then global counter terror consensus. Then economic trade suspended, FN, MFN withdrawn, most favored nation. Then comes to hydrological part, that is Indus Water Treaty in abeyance. Then comes to legal part, rejection of the PCS, Permanent Court of Arbitrations award as null and void. These are instruments of statecraft. Then comes to third challenges: escalation management under the nuclear overhang. Then external pressure for mediation, resisting rehyphenation, legal contestation over the Indus Water Treaty. Then instability within Pakistan and its spillover. Then comes to the way forward: keep deterrence credible, communication calibrated, accelerate storage and hydel capacity on the western rivers, sustain UNSC listings and FATF style scrutiny of terror financing, preserve bilateralism, keep the terrorism test as the threshold for any engagement, insulate people centric domains where feasible without diluting the doctrine. New normal doctrine. Comes to new normal doctrine, assured retaliation to terror attacks, no nuclear blackmail, no distinction between terrorists and their state sponsors. Comes to PYQ corner, present an account of the Indus Water Treaty and examine its ecological, economic, and political implications in the context of changing bilateral relations. This question asked in 2016 to 12.5 marker. The next question, the proposed withdrawal of international security assistance force from Afghanistan in 2014 is fraught with major security implications for the countries of the region. Examine in light of the fact that India is faced with a plethora of challenges and needs to safeguard its own strategic interests. This question asked in 2013, 10 marker question. Then another question is, terrorism has become a significant threat to global peace and security. Evaluate the effectiveness of the United Nations Security Council's Counter-Terrorism Committee and its associated bodies in addressing and mitigating this treaty, mitigating this threat at the international level. 2024 question 15 marker. I'm repeating again this question. Terrorism has become a significant threat to global peace and security. Evaluate the effectiveness of the United Nations Security Council's Counter-Terrorism Committee and its associated bodies in addressing and mitigating this threat at the international level. The question asked in 2024, 15 marker question. A quick recap. What is this quick recap? Remember one analytical sentence here. What is that sentence? After 2025, India's Pakistan policy rests on assured retaliation, rejection of nuclear blackmail, no distinction between terrorists and their sponsors, and the use of every instrument of statecraft, that is military, diplomatic, economic, and hydrological, until cross-border terrorism ends credibly and irreversibly. So that sentence can anchor almost any mains 2026 answer on India-Pakistan relationship. Having understood the relationship defined by deterrence, let us now move to the relationship defined by managed competition, that is India and China. Because no discussion of India's rise in the 21st century is complete without understanding the opportunities, competition, and challenges that define India-China relations. Having understood India's relationship with Bangladesh and Pakistan, let us now examine one of the most significant relationships in India foreign policy, that is India and China. No bilateral relationship influences India's strategic environment as profoundly as the one. This is because India and China are two major Asian powers, two large economies, two nuclear armed neighbors, and two influential participants in global governance. Their relationship therefore has implications not only for Asia but also for the international system. For UPSC, the objective is not to memorize events, it is understand the strategic logic that shapes this relationship. Let us begin with the first principle, that is India-China relations are characterized by cooperation and competition existing. India-China relations are characterized by cooperation and competition existing simultaneously. This is important. Many students describe the relationship only as rivalry. Others describe it only through economic engagement. But those approaches are incomplete. The reality is more complex. What is that reality? India and China cooperate in BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the G20, climate negotiations, and issues relating to the global south. At the same time, they compete in regional influence, technology, manufacturing, connectivity, maritime presence, and strategic partnerships. Therefore, India China relations cannot be understood through a single label. They represent a relationship of managed competition with selective cooperation. That is the first analytical idea you should remember. They represent a relationship of managed competition with selective cooperation. Now let us discuss the most important challenge here, the boundary question. India and China have differing perceptions of the line of actual control, LAC. This has periodically resulted in military tensions, deployment of forces, and diplomatic negotiations. However, for UPSC, the important issue is not the description of individual incidents. No, no. The important issue is not the description of individual incidents. The important issue is the strategic principle that now guides India's policy. What is that strategic principle? India has a consistently maintained that India has consistently maintained that peace and tranquility along the border are essential for the overall development of bilateral relations. Peace and tranquility along the border, essential for the overall development of bilateral relations. India does not argue that every boundary issue must be resolved immediately. No, not at all. Boundary disputes often requires long negotiations, but India does emphasizes that peace, stability, and effective border management that is must be maintained while discussions continue. This has become the foundation of India's contemporary approach. This leads us to another important development. The relationship is increasingly guided by the idea that border stability is a prerequisite for broader corporation, broader cooperation. The relationship is increasingly guided by the idea that border stability is a prerequisite for broader cooperation. Think about it. Can countries significantly expand political trust, economic engagement, or people to people exchanges if prolonged military tensions continue along the border? Prolonged military tensions continue along the border, naturally that becomes extremely difficult. That becomes extremely difficult. Therefore, India seeks a gradual process, maintain peace, reduce tensions, strengthen confidence, then expand broader cooperation. Notice that this is a calibrated approach. It neither ignores security concerns nor rejects engagement altogether. Now let us turn to the economic dimension. India and China remain important trading partners. At the same time, India has recognized that excessive dependence in strategically important sector can create vulnerabilities. Strategic vulnerabilities. The objective is not complete economic disengagement. Modern economies are deeply interconnected. Instead, increasingly seeks economic resilience, Economic resilience means diversifying supply chains, developing domestic manufacturing, strengthening trusted technology partnerships, and reducing dependence in critical sectors such as electronics, telecommunications, semiconductors, critical minerals, and advanced manufacturing. This reflects the broader transition from traditional geopolitics toward geoeconomics. Foreign policy, industrial policy, technology, and national security, and increasingly interconnected. So, another important dimension is the Indo Pacific. India and China have different strategic perspectives regarding the Indo Pacific region. For India, the Indo Pacific represents an open, inclusive, rules based region where freedom of navigation, international law, and peaceful resolution of disputes are respected. India therefore strengthens cooperation with countries such as Japan, Australia, France, members, ASEAN members, and the United States to promote maritime security, connectivity, resilient supply chains, and regional stability. India's Indo Pacific policy is not directed against any particular country. Rather, it seeks to ensure that the region remains stable, inclusive, and governed by international law. This distinction is important in UPSC answers. Now, let us discuss another emerging dimension, that is technology and geoeconomics. In the 21st century, competition increasingly extends beyond territory. Countries also compete through artificial intelligence, semiconductors, critical minerals, digital infrastructure, renewable energy technologies, and resilient supply chains. This explains why India simultaneously promotes Make in India and trusted technology partnerships, innovation, and diversification of supply chains. These initiatives are not merely economic policies, they are also important instruments of foreign policy. At the same time, India continues to engage China through multilateral institutions. Both countries cooperate within BRICS, the SCO, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and several global forums. This demonstrates another important principle of India's foreign policy. India does not seek permanent confrontation. Instead, it follows a balanced approach. Compete where necessary, cooperate where possible, continue dialogue at all times. This reflects strategic autonomy in practice. Now, let us step back. What does this relationship teach us? It teaches us that international relations are rarely about permanent friends or permanent adversaries. Countries pursue their national interest. Sometimes that creates cooperation, sometimes competition. Often existed simultaneously. India China relations are perhaps the best example of this reality. Comes to current affairs anchor 2025-2026. Since late 2024, India and China have been in a phase best described as a thaw, but a tactical thaw. Not a strategic reset. Learn that sentence, that is tactical thaw, not a strategic reset. It is the single most examinable idea on this relationship. The sequence matters here. In October 2024, the two sides reached an understanding on patrolling arrangements along the LAC line of actual control, covering the remain friction points. Days later, the Prime Minister and President Xi met at the Kazan BRICS summit. The first structured bilateral meeting in 5 years. The special representative dialogue and the boundary question resumed in December 2024. This is 23rd dialogue resumes. And in 2025, two sides even agreed to explore early harvest approach to boundary delimitation. In August 2025, the Prime Minister traveled to China for the SCO summit at Tianjin, the first Prime Minister visit in 7 years. The first Prime Ministerial visit in 7 years. Then came the people centric steps. What are those people centric steps? The Kailash Manas Sarovar, the Kailash Manas Sarovar Yatra resumed in 2025 after 5 years. And is running again in 2026. Direct flights resumed from late 2025. Tourist visas reopened. China eased exports of rare earth magnets, fertilizers, and tunnel boring machines, input critical to Indian manufacturing. And in 2026, India relaxed parts of Press Note 3, its 2020 investment screening rule. But now the other side of ledger, and this is what separates a good answer from an average one. A boundary question remains unresolved. The trade deficit remains close to $100 billion. The vulnerability this chapter warned about, that is trade deficit $100 billion. And a new concern has emerged upstream, that is China's approval of mega dam on the Yarlung Sangpo, the Brahmaputra, which is why India has pressed for the resumption of hydrological data sharing through the expert level mechanism. So remember the balanced formulation, that is stabilization, yes, normalization, partially, strategic trust, not yet. So this is the honest, that is the honest state of India-China relations going into Mains 2026. How UPSC may ask this question in UPSC CSU Mains 2026? UPSC is unlikely to ask describe India-China relations. Instead of that, it may ask like this: discuss the evolving nature of India-China relations in the context of border management and strategic competition. Or how has geoeconomics influenced India's approach towards China? Or peace along the border is essential for the normal development of India-China relations examine? Or evaluate the challenges and opportunities in India-China relations in the context of multipolar Asia? Notice the pattern here. UPSC expects analysis, not chronology. Comes to answer rating framework. Whenever a question appears on India-China, remember four headings, that is strategic importance, areas of cooperation, areas of competition, and way forward. Comes to strategic importance part, that is two major Asian powers having shared boundary and economic significance and regional and global influence both. And comes to the second part, areas of cooperation in BRICS, SCO, G20, climate negotiations, and global south. trade and multilateral engagement, and comes to third part, that is areas of competition. This is most important, that is boundary management areas of competition. This is mostly important thing. Then strategic trust, this is also Indo-Pacific technology, supply chains, connectivity, regional influence. These are the areas of competition. Then comes to the way forward, that is fourth one. What is the way forward here? Maintain peace and stability along the border, strengthen diplomatic and military dialogue, build confidence through sustained engagement, expand cooperation in mutually beneficial areas, and manage competition reasonably while preserving strategic autonomy. Remember one analytical sentence here, that is India's objective is neither confrontation nor dependence, but stable competition based on border peace, strategic autonomy, economic resilience, and sustained diplomatic engagement. That single sentence can elevate the quality of almost any UPSC answer on India China relations. I'm repeating again. India's objective is neither confrontation nor dependence, but stable competition based on border peace, strategic autonomy, economic resilience, and sustained diplomatic engagement. Then comes to the anchor PVQs. What is the PYQ corner here? What are the previous questions? Boundary question unresolved. 100 billion US dollar trade deficit. Hydrology pressing data for Yarling Sangpo. Peace and tranquility on the border remain the prerequisite for normal relations. That is, China is using its economic relations and positive trade surplus as tools to develop potential military power status in Asia. In light of this statement, discuss its impact on India as her neighbor. 2017 question, 10 markers. This is. Then comes to another question. With respect to the South China Sea maritime territorial disputes and rising tension, affirm the need for safeguarding maritime security to ensure freedom of navigation and overflight throughout the region. In this context, discuss the bilateral issues between India and China. 2014 question, 12.5 marker. And the next question, the West is fostering India as an alternative to reduce dependence on China's supply chain and as a strategic ally to counter China's political and economic dominance. Explain this statement with examples. This question asked in 2024 as 15 marker question. So having examined India's most complex bilateral relationship, let us now move to another important dimensions of India's foreign policy, that is India's engagement with the major powers. Because in a rapidly changing international order, India's rise increasingly depends upon its ability to build a diversified strategic partnership while preserving independent decision making. So, next chapter, that is India's major power partnerships. That is we are going to discuss in the next class.